I met a gypsy.
But I think you're definitely one of those people where it's just like zone in, figure it out. But
I think for consistency, it's the way it needs to be, because you can repeat you've conquered it from all angles. You know what I mean? You've understood, all parts of say the corner. The ruts, the berm. You've took everything into account. I don't know. So much the terminology of motocross and on track, so it's difficult for me to put into words on what I'm trying to say. But you've analyzed everything. You know what I mean? Exactly where you want to be. Landing.
Well, put it into car terms. Put it into your world.
You know exactly where you want to be at where you want to be braking. Maybe it's a really long entry, so you're turning in flat. Just after the entry of this curb. Then you're braking just after the 100 at the 90, and then that's as soon as after your peak brake, you're just starting to turn in, releasing the pressure as you're bleeding into your first apex and then washing wide, where that's what you're doing, where the others are just coming in, not real reference, just on field, turning and braking, kind of getting in, locking the rear, locking the front, all over the place a little bit, coming in, missing the corner here and there, all over the place for a few laps. And in the end, they start to get that feel, you know what I mean? They go, okay, that was too deep, that was too early. Here I'm locking the rear, here I'm now pinching the front. And they have that position, but it's never going to be 100% accurate, you know what I mean? Where we're on reference. We know at the beginning of that entry curb, we're starting to turn in just past the 100. Now we're braking. Soon as after the initial hit of braking after the 100 at the 90, we're coming off the brake and starting to turn, to actually crank the lock on. And that's not going to change. The entry curb's not going to change. 100 board's not going to change. So if you do that exactly right, you're going to be hitting that 100% every time. But if you're on feel, which some drivers are on feel, some people, you have your reference, but you're locked in on feel. And it's both ways can work, but in order to do it 100% right, especially when you get to the you could say the higher end of the pyramid, it needs to be 100% on reference, because you're relying on that, you know what I mean? It can't be just on feel. And sometimes it has to be in the wet, you know what I mean? You have to be on feel. You don't know. You're starting the race and it's wet. You've got no rev. You haven't done any wet running on this track. You haven't done anything, and you have to go out there and you need to just have that feel. Your reference is it's 100 in the dry. Under this hairpin, so you're gonna go. I'm gonna give myself 50 meters, so just maybe around the 150. I'm gonna lift out and coast, and that's either gonna be you're either gonna go shit. I need to put more pressure on, or oh no, that's a little bit early, and then you judge that for the first couple laps, or for the first lap, you get a feel of you go on a reference in a way, you know what I mean? Because you're not just going in blind and going, oh, okay, this is where I'm going to go. You have your reference from your 100s or your 50 in there. So you're kind of going to go 50 meters back, and then that's where you're going to bleed out of the throttle coming onto the brake. And that's where you're going to know, okay, that's too early, that's too late, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you're going to have new references for those conditions, but it's going to be drying out. So you're going to have to know that each lap that you're driving, that you might need to either go a little step forward, a little step backwards from that reference. If you don't have that reference, then you're just going to be guessing the whole time, and the thing isn't going to be consistent. You're going to be ragdolling your car. You won't be able to be nice and gentle and smooth your inputs, because it's going to be different.
I think too that style that you're talking about of being super clinical about your approach, it probably goes a long way in your world for relating feedback back to engineers. Because if you're doing the same thing every time, like tire degradation, for example, so if you're hitting the same marker, the same brake pressure, if you're doing everything the same and then the car's doing something different, that's probably when you'd be able to go okay, I can relate back to engineers tire feel 100%. And things like that.
And it's
but if you're doing it different every time, then it's well, what's the variable?
Exactly. You have your ride height, and you have your plank, your wooden plank on the bottom of the car. And for it to be optimum, you run as low as you possibly can, because you have less overall drag and you have more, the car's lower to the ground, so you have more downforce, generated by the floor. So you want to try and get as low as possible, almost in all circumstances. Obviously, then in race trim, you have a lot more fuel, so you have to raise the car. And because the car's going to be squatting a lot more, you could say bouncing. So you need to raise the car. But for quali, especially, and in the race, for those calculations, you want to be as low as possible. And the team are trying to work out, all right, we need to find out, where we're going to be bottoming. How much is too much?
Yeah.
And that's going to be wearing the plank too much to an illegal level. And also, it's the drivability isn't great, but then wear's too high and it's not really working. So, all right, we're going to maybe go and find the limit of the plank here. And if you're going at every single, if you're going to, all right, we're going to back to back this, we're going to do it, on this level and here. And if you're driving two different lines, because the circuit has bumps. The circuit where you're exiting over a curb, onto a double curb, or if you don't hit that double curb, it might bottom, it might not bottom. If you late apex, on the entry, you might feel the bottoming. If you don't, you might not.
Yeah.
So if you don't drive exactly perfectly on your references on the exact same line, hitting the exact same exits, using your curb usage exactly the same, or even just crossing over the straight at a different point of the crowning, or exiting, the bottoming is going to be completely different, and you're not going to get the calculations and numbers and feedback that you're going to be working towards, and you're just going to send yourself into a completely wrong direction. So if you have 100% references, if you're working on 100% exact same piece of track, same piece of line, within reason, you're not going to just do a stupid line. But if you're working, on the optimum line for the optimum amount of bottoming for the weekend, it needs to be 100% on point.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. Like, that was one big takeaway from going to Barcelona and getting to put on the headset, like with Danny and his engineer. Mind blowing, dude. Like, honestly, I walked away from there being like, it's probably too much. Like, this is way too much information for someone going that fucking fast in a car. But that's like really how much goes into it.
And that's the, when you come in from the track, you come into the box and, they sit in for, that's initial comments. That's just off the top of your head. You're talking about, all right, high speed, a little bit oversteer on the entry,
very like
but
general.
Then the low speed, slight understeer on entry, under rotation, and then I'm struggling on traction on the exit. Bottoming's good, ride's good. I feel I could take a little bit more front wing maybe, or I could, a little bit less front wing. It's just little comments trying to cover all areas, not going, the entry of turn 1, turn 2, going, because you don't have that much time. So that's what you hear is your initial plain little sort of dot points, and then you go into your debrief, kind of post-session. You have your post-session debrief, which can be, an hour or an hour and a half. And that's where, you don't go into like Gaga land, but you just like dive into
really
it
into the
completely
weeds.
into everything. You'll debrief the session, driver, engineer, going through the run plan, the times, what happened, and then you'll dive into it and then download the data, and then you'll go through it, you properly. So it does get deeper and deeper, and then as you move up into Formula One and you're doing, say, Formula One test days or private testing, and it goes further, and these meetings are longer. There's a lot more people, kind of watching in, and there's a lot more people involved. There's so much more areas to be covered. And it just gets obviously more and more full on in that department. So it is a lot to sort of understand when you're green, you could say, to that department.
Well, even like because we could hear the whole session. So like we had the headphones on for like the entire like FP1, FP2, and then quali. And like in the free practices, it's like, okay, we need you to go through turn 2 at 120. And then the next lap, we need you to go through turn 2 at 140. And they're just trying to get all this data on the car. And just for it was interesting to get context of why FP1 and FP2, it's so like all over the place with time. I mean, obviously the good cars are kind of more towards the top normally, but there's so much that's going on behind the scenes of trying to get data. And I guess earlier in the season too, brand new cars, like there was probably a lot more of that going on than normal.
They're trying to get a lot more numbers.
But it just blew me away, man.
Yeah, there's, what you would have been hearing is like an aero cruise where they have, a rotary with all different, obviously, with all different, how I could say, sections on the rotary, that they can go to. They would go to aero, and then there would be 7 positions on the aero, from P1 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and depending on what position they go to is what speed they'll cap it out at. And they go, all right, after turn 12, go to aero position P4, and go flat, and it'll be a 200k limit. And after turn 12, you might have a straight of a couple hundred meters. You go flat, and it just limits at 200 down that straight. you press OK, go back, to your aero P1, come back to tire 1, and that's collected. That aero cruise is done. That will go to aero and tire department, and he will analyze to try and see what he can and take his calculations forward for the weekend from that. But then they can do that in basically however they want. So that's what you would have been hearing. That is typically done in P1 and P2 sessions on in laps and out laps.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And to listen to the full 3-hour podcast, search Gypsy Tales in your favorite podcast platform or click the link in the description below. Gypsy Gang.